So I recently made this new shield, and I went with a lenticular design, which is just a fancy academic word of saying it's dished or boiled or domed. So the inside, or the top of my shield, right where it connects to the boss, is about 1 inch higher than the edge of the shield, which gives it this classic bold shape. Or I say classic, it's quite rare to see in reenactment, even though based off of historical evidence, such as manuscript pictures and even some archaeological evidence, such as the shape of the flared rim on shield bosses and the shape of clamps on shield rims and stuff like that, do indicate that this style of shield was quite common, even though it's not popular to represent in reenactment kits, which is sort of why I made one. It's historically accurate, and it's a good way to set my kit apart. Now, as I said, it's only about an inch difference, and this is a little under ½ an inch thick. The wood I started with was a 1/4 inch thick, and then as I added my cloth and leather over the wood, of course, it got a bit thicker. So it doesn't, you can't really look at it and see it's dished, but if you run your hand over the wood, it's a bit easier to tell. So when I was making the shield, one of the decisions I had to make was how dished I want it to be. Now, I ended up going with a thin shield, which I think is supported by some archaeological evidence. The Sutton Hoo shield seems to be dished a lenticular shield like this, and also appears to be quite shallow. Likewise, the round shield found at Dura Europos, which is a late Roman shield, again is dished slightly. And the Clanura shield, which is an Iron Age Irish shield, that one isn't technically lenticular because it's a rectangle, but it has that same property where it's bent across both axes. And it's again a rather shallowly dished shield. So that's what I went with, this sort of shallow shield. And but there's evidence based off of the manuscript images that they could be quite deeply dished. And if you watch the Demi Cotter YouTube channel, you'll see that's what Roland Warzecko went with when he made a Franca shield for one of his videos, is that it's a very deep shield. And I think that these shallow shields are probably the way to go, rather than the deeply dished shields like Roland Warzecko had. And that's mostly what I'm going to talk about today. There's a few other things I want to talk about lenticular shields, some sort of myths I want to dismiss, but I think they will come organically out of this discussion between the deep and shallowly dished lenticular shields. So first is shield use. So if you use a flat shield like the Vikings had, they seem to have done more flat shields than the lenticular shields, you're probably familiar with a few moves you can do, such as if you hold your shield this way, you can punch at the enemy and it'll knock his shield into him and open him up. Now if you have a very deep dished shield, you can't really do that. It comes too far back that being able to use the edge in that aggressive manner doesn't work as much. You can still punch forward with your shield and hit them with the boss, but using the edge isn't really an option if you dish too much. Whereas with the shallower shield, it's still quite an option. Likewise, there's a few other nasty moves. So if you throw, again, your body weight into it flat, instead of punching the person, you hit his shield, you can pin his arms against him. And that'll be a bit harder with if you're using a shield that's deeper, but if you're using a deeper shield, it might be harder to get pinned like that. And once it's pinned, you don't have to keep pinning him, but you can, if you're do it really fast and really strong, just slam your shield up. So the rim of your shield will hit his chin, and that'll do all sorts of nasty damage. It can break his jawbone. If you do it fast enough, it would probably be possible to snap his neck. Well, that would be quite difficult. And again, if you have that dished shield, your shield rim will be too far back. I don't think you would be able to pull those sort of moves off. So I think using the dished or a slightly dished lenticular shield, you have a bit more freedom in how you use your shield aggressively, and those are sort of options that you would lose if it becomes too deep. I think you also have the problem about skidding and sliding weapons. So one of the fears I see on forums a lot when people talk about lenticular shields is that a weapon could skid off instead of being deflected or blocked by your shield. So if I have my dish shield and somebody takes their spear and stabs at me, then rather than being stopped by my shield, if you have it dished, it could slide off using the curvature of the shield and end up hitting you somewhere else. And I think that you're less likely to find that the closer to flat it is. And especially with a gentle curve, if you know where the shield's going to hit, you can move your shield slightly so it ends up being basically flat. So if I was trying to block a spear and I knew it was coming in front of the boss, I could move my shield forward slightly like this, so if it does glance, it wouldn't glance up towards my face. Or if I know that it's going to be hitting below the boss, I can just move it forward in the opposite direction, and you have the same problem. Rather, you have the same solution. And of course, just having a less bowed shield will decrease the chances of that slip happening. I also think that even with a deeper dish shield, you don't have that problem in authentic combat. So if you do lots of reenactment or LARP, or even HEMA if you're not using sharps, you're probably using something with a nice rounded edge. If you can see here, my spearhead actually has a nice, very thick tip meant to help the safety of your opponent, so it doesn't end up hitting them too hard. And so it's made to actually glance off, like I was talking about, so it doesn't hit the person too hard. And even if you don't have a spear like this, if you're not using sharps, and I don't know anyone who uses sharp spears because of, even though I've seen people use sharp swords, it's probably at least cut into, so it doesn't end up at a point, but is actually sort of rounded. And it's again designed so it doesn't hit and just stick into whoever you're fighting. It's designed to slide off things. So yes, when you're using reenactment grade weaponry designed to skid off your opponent, I think it is possible that a lenticular shield, even a quite shallow one, runs the risk of the weapon skidding off and hitting you. But in an authentic fight, if this was, the actual Dark Ages, where your opponent is trying to kill you and has something that's quite sharp, I think even on these deeper dish shields, there's still a good chance it could stick in. And definitely on a shallow shield like this one, that the spear point or the sword edge or whatever you're fighting against will actually bite into the shield, whether that's the wood of the shield or the leather covering, will bite into it rather than skidding off. So I think that's a bit of a reenactor's problem. So I do understand the safety concern it has for historical reenactors, but I don't think that was a problem for the actual soldiers of the time period. Something else you hear quite a lot is that you have troubles holding other weapons. So it's popular for reenactors to hold a second spear or a second javelin or an axe or some sort of backup weapon in their shield hand. And one of the fears is that with a lenticular shield, because the rim of the shield is back behind the center where your grip is, you won't be able to hold another weapon in your hand. And I think that's definitely a concern with a deep shield, but with a shallow shield like this, not so much. So while the Durasiropo shield and the Sutton Hoo shield do seem to have flat grips, and your hand would be forward and it would be hard to hold a shield, or hold a spear or whatever else in your shield hand, this isn't always the case. So the Clanura shield, which again I said isn't technically lenticular because it's a rectangle, but I think is a good enough example. While the shield edge does come back behind the grip is also thick. It's not a flat piece of wood like the rest of the shield, but it's actually a thick square. So the shield edge and the back of the shield grip actually lines up. And that's what I did with this shield. Just as it dishes about an inch, my shield grip is an inch thick. So I can hold my spear in my hand quite easily. Now it is still a bit more annoying to hold. I don't have as sure a grip as I did with a flat shield, but I can definitely hold this. I might be at more risk of losing my shield if something hit my shield. I might end up dropping the spear. But I can run around and jump and go around battle holding an extra javelin or my actual spear if I'm throwing javelins or what have you with a lenticular shield that's relatively shallow, I should say. But I also think this might not be a problem sort of in general, because we're assuming they're holding their other weapons in their offhand or in their shield hand like this. And that might not necessarily be the case. So if you're holding extra javelins, yes, it's a nice place to hold it, and it's what we know the earlier Romans did back when they had shields that were only curved on one axis, the classic scudum, and before they adopted these lenticular round shields. So it is a nice place to hold it. But we also know that when the Romans did switch to the lenticular round shields, they had troops that used multiple javelins, but just instead of holding it in their offhand, they had large bags of javelins, like a quiver for your arrows, but for javelins. And I think that's just a nice solution to have. You don't have to be holding, if you have extra weapons, you don't have to be holding them in your shield hand. You can have, in the case of javelins or spears, some sort of external carrier, or I've seen people hold axes and things on the inside of their shield so they can grab it after dropping their spear. And again, that can be worn quite easily on the belt. So that is my quick introduction to the lenticular shield.